channel. We're back again for another Pokemon Creepypasta. So today we're going to be reading Whole again. This one is, I think it's somewhat long, so I'll try not to read super fast, but I'll read, fast enough because this recording software can only exceed to an hour, even though I never really record up to an hour. But, whatever. Let's just get right into it. I've always been a little behind with playing the Pokemon games. I just couldn't afford some of them until much later, let alone wouldn't be able to play them unless I had the right system anyway. It wasn't until the release of Black and White that I was able to get my very own Nintendo DS. A friend had lent me hers when I had purchased Platinum and Soul Silver to play several months back, so needless to say, I was pretty excited to finally have the chance to play through future games at my own pace without needing to stop at a stranger's intervals. To celebrate, I figure I could spoil myself a little more and pick up a copy of Pokemon Black. I had been watching my friend play Pokemon White for the past few weeks and had been itching to start my own Unova adventure. I stopped by a local GameStop to see if they had any used versions of the game. I knew it was a bit of a long shot since Black and White had been released earlier in the month, and probably wouldn't be on used shelves yet, but I remained hopeful. Used games tend to be a tad bit cheaper, and I could really do with saving a couple extra bucks. Thankfully, luck seemed to be on my side that day, as I spied a lone copy of Pokemon Black in the used section and excitedly scooped it up. I left the store acting like a giddy grade schooler, though slightly disappointed due to the fact I couldn't afford an additional warranty with the game, and rushed home to start playing. I spent the next couple of weeks playing Pokemon Black, relying on the website walkthroughs to figure out where I should go and what Pokemon I should catch in each area. I've developed a pretty strong team by the end of the main story arc, consisting of Superior, Zebstrika, Simipour, Chandelure, Audino, and Reshiram. I loved legendary dragons in this game, so immediately after I finished my final battle with N and such, I promptly got myself a Zekrom through the GTS and Japanese one at the boot. However, there's one Pokemon I wanted the most in this game, Kyurem. I had fallen in love with Kyurem since I first saw its design on Bulbapedia about a year back. It made me a little sad that I couldn't get him until I was done with the main storyline, though after reading what you've encountered him at level 75, the wait was probably well worth it, especially with randomly high-level trainers who would appear at the main story arc. After exploring the few other features that unlocked after beating the main game, I took my team and went hunting for Kyurem. After arriving in the village, which spoke about a monster that lives in the giant chasm, it took me a while to figure out where to go in order to reach Kyurem's lair. Finally, I come across the boulder that I needed to move to get into the area and excitedly ventured into the chasm, fighting a couple of opponents with my Reshiram and catching a much-needed Ditto along their way. It wasn't long before I reached a point where you hear Kyurem cry in the area that turns into a snow-filled wasteland. I got a little lost trying to find the cave that would lead me to the Pokemon, but I eventually found it and hurried my way inside. This is when things started to get a little weird. According to what I read online, I should have emerged into the cavern where Kyurem would be waiting for me to interact with it at the end. Instead, I ended up inside some sort of tunnel which made a sharp turn to the left. Perplexed, I figured perhaps the information I read for encountering Kyurem was incorrect, or at least partially relayed by the website, so I decided to follow the tunnel anyway. I was surprised to find that no wild Pokemon had appeared as I continued the area, but gathered that was just part of the gameplay at this point. After the sharp left turn, the tunnel straightened out, and writing on the wall, much like what you would see in the underwater ruins, only in the brown-black background, began to appear every 20 paces or so. After interacting with one of them, I noticed that these writings were readable and were telling the story of Kyurem in a dialogue boxes. Backtracking, I learned that the story was told by one of the villagers who was kidnapped by Kyurem years ago, though the tale was a little different from what I've heard in the village earlier. According to the first four walls, Kyurem was supposedly the original body of Reshiram and Zekrom before the dragon split into two. The remaining husk traveled to the furthest reach of Unova, and it confined before finding solace in the underground where it was supposed to sleep for eternity. However, when the ice meteorite fell to the earth, it crashed into the area where Kyurem dwelled and stirred the Pokemon from its slumber. Kyurem, enraged and bloodthirsty, began stalking the shadows at night, snatching anyone and anything that drew near, dragging them into its lair where it would later feast on them and then try to cure its insatiable hunger. Apparently, Kyurem was trying to make itself whole again and needed the flesh of the living in order to do so. I saved the game after, and I read these just in case I would run into Kyurem shortly after this point. The story had chilled me, though, and I wondered why something so morbid was in a Pokemon game in the first place. Then again, I knew that Legends of Sinnoh and Platinum were pretty freaky, and the fact that Black and White is also geared towards an older audience anyways, so I thought nothing more of Kyurem's story. I then noticed that there were 3 more walls with writing as I continued, but upon reading those, a different message came in light. An order of the walls said, "Get out, don't venture further, and death awaits for those who refuse to turn back now." Again, I saved the game after each of these walls, both nervous and excited because I knew I was getting much closer to finding Kira. However, about 20 paces after the final wall, the screen went black and the sound of a descending staircase like the one you would hear in the older Pokemon games was heard. Then a dialogue box appeared. "The dead never sleep. Kiram wants to be whole again." The battle music then started up and Kiram appeared, which was odd because you're not supposed to encounter Kiram in this fashion, and two, the screen didn't even flash after the battle music started. I watched the animations as my character sent out Reshiram, who was my first Pokemon in my party. By this point, I suspected that the used game I bought was hacked, much like the ones I had read about on the internet for years. I was a little disappointed that I didn't have the original copy of the game, but proceeded the battle with Kiram anyway, seeing as I wanted the Pokemon and that only this section of the game appeared to be hacked. Not wanting to use my Master Ball unless it was a last resort, I went into my Reshiram's attacks and selected Fusion Flare to do much needed damage to the higher level opponent. Kiram's speed must have been higher than my own, however, seeing as it moved first with sheer cold and unfortunately hit me with the attack, causing Reshiram to faint in one turn. No matter, I figured. I had 5 other Pokemon who could weaken Kiram just as well, but when the bottom screen changed for me to call out my next Pokemon, I couldn't help but gape in disbelief. The other 5 Pokemon I had with me initially had vanished. There's only one other Pokemon I can use in my party that I could use, and that was the Japanese Zekrom I've gotten from the GTS earlier. Confused and a little peeved after it dawned on me that it might have been part of the hack, I sent out Zekrom and selected the move Dragon Claw from its set. Just like before, Kiram moved first with sheer cold, which inconceivably hit my Pokemon once more. After Zekrom had faded, I placed my finger on the power button, ready to turn the system off. I was furious. I assumed that the hack version was designed to make Kiram uncatchable, and that I was the one unlucky person who had fallen for its devious trick. My plan from here was to reset the game, backtrack to the main entrance, and fly to a town nearby so I could trade a Kiram for my friend and get it through the GTS instead. However, just before I was about to flip the switch on my DS, the 2 screens faded into black and the option for choosing a Pokemon substitution appeared again on the bottom of the screen. Much to my surprise, the Pokemon opted to substitute my already fainted Pokemon, Reshiram and Zekrom. Their health bars were completely full again, but instead of the normal green coloration, which would indicate high health, it was red. Baffled, curiosity got the better of me, and I selected Reshiram and sent out to see what would happen. I really wish I just shut off the game when I had the chance. The top screen faded into the battle as Reshiram was sent out once more, but something was wrong. Reshiram looked different. Its sprite looked all mangled and bloodied, and the closest part of Reshiram's face towards the screen looked as though it was peeled away, exposing the skull underneath. Its eyes were a deathly red instead of its normal blue, which were accented by the sinking black sockets surrounding them, and its ribcage seemed to be showing. Additionally, Reshiram's wing on the furthest side of the screen seemed to be broken and shredded, making the Pokemon look freakishly unbalanced as it moved in the slowest animation, and though its health was at critical level, along with the alarming beeping sound that accompanied it. What really set me off, though, was the sound of its cry. It was long, distorted, and droning, and crackled a little midway through. I felt sick. The current state of my Reshiram made it remarkably difficult for me to look at it any further, so I turned my attention to Kiram instead, so I wouldn't double over an illness. But I looked at Kiram, and I noticed it had changed too. Unlike my Reshiram, however, Kiram didn't look disfigured, but healthier, rather, for lack of a better way to describe it. Its wrinkled skin appeared to be a lot smoother, and its stance was more upright than it was supposed to be normally. Studying its form further, I then noticed something that sent chills through my body. Though the coloration of Kiram appeared to be normal, its hind feet and tail had changed in the appearance that looked remarkably similar to those Reshiram's design. Fear gripped me, as it was almost as if Kiram had absorbed the parts of Reshiram into itself in an attempt to be whole again, much like the story from the walls were saying. I shook my head, feeling stupid for even humoring the notion. This was just some sort of sick hack, right? Before I could do anything else, a dialogue box suddenly appeared. Kiram wants to be whole again. The animation for Reshiram hurting itself played as if the health dropped significantly until it had one remaining hit point. Another dialogue. Reshiram hurt itself. Then a long distorted cry of Reshiram sounded again as its last remaining bit of health vanished while the fainting animation played. Reshiram died. Again, the two screens faded to black and the Pokemon substitution prompt came up on the button screen. I noticed that Reshiram had completely disappeared and now that Zekrom was the only Pokemon left in my party. Its health bar was still full and red, and I was terrified. What kind of hack was this? I sat there staring at the prompt screen, struggling between my own perverse curiosity to continue and desire to shut off the DS. After about 5 minutes, I selected Zekrom to send out. Just like before, the top screen slowly faded back into the battle as Zekrom made its appearance. Like Reshiram beforehand, it too looked bloodied and mangled, but on the opposite side. The only difference, however, was that Zekrom's closest arm to the screen had been stripped down to the bone, and its sunken eyes were a sickly yellow rather than red. It had the same slow looping animation accompanied by the beeping critical health sound, and its cry also mimicked the likes of Reshiram's before, long, droning, and crackling. I looked at Kyurem again, though now it almost looked like nothing like the Pokemon I had come to adore. Apart from its identifying colors, Kyurem now looked completely smooth and stood upright. Its forelimbs and wings looked like Zekrom's, and its back, feet, and tail still mirrored Reshiram. Its face still looked like a strange combination of both Pokemon, though it still had to be Kyurem's characteristics crown. I braced myself for whatever was going to happen next, and sure enough, the same dialogue box appeared as it did before. Kyurem wants to be whole again. Like Reshiram before, Zekrom damaged itself with the last remaining bit of its health and released its distorted cry and fainted. Zekrom hurt itself. Zekrom died. Tears were streaming down my face at this point out of sheer terror. As much as I wanted to, I couldn't pull my eyes away from the screen. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It just didn't seem real. I had to keep telling myself this was a sick joke in order to keep my sanity. Still, I wanted to see if there was more. The bottom screen faded, and now it was just me and Kyurem. No Pokemon, no nothing. I couldn't even access my bag to use my Master Ball to catch the creature to see if it would end this horror. Then, a new dialogue box popped up. Kyurem is whole again. Do you want to add this Pokemon to your party? The options for yes or no appeared. I was trembling. I didn't want this thing in my party. This thing wasn't even Kyurem. This thing was some sort of monster who devoured my Pokemon and take their appearance for itself. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second as I selected the option of no. Everything stopped. The strange image of Kyurem stopped looming, its animation and the music went silent. I couldn't even prompt anything by pressing buttons. I would have considered the game was frozen even if it weren't for the dialogue box which appeared a few seconds later. I see. That's too bad. Suddenly, Kyurem's figure distorted and turned itself into the face of the screen. Its mouth opened in a gaping roar which sounded like Kyurem, Reshiram, and Zekrom combined as it lunged towards me, much like Garantina does when it first shows up in Platinum. The sound blasted so loudly out of my DS speakers that I screamed and dropped the game system in startled surprise, backing away from it as I did. I sat huddled on the couch staring at the game console as though it was possessed. Then I noticed a familiar sound on the startup screen as we began to play through. Hesitantly, I reached for my game and pressed start, bringing myself to the opening menu. My game had been erased. The option of new game appeared as where my file was supposed to be. Not wanting to deal with my hacked black version anymore, I shut my DS off and tossed it to the side where I left it alone for the rest of the day. I haven't touched Pokemon Black since that day. My friend tried to coax me to play it again, but I can't bring myself to place my card in DS. I actively avoid watching or battling players if they had Reshiram, Zekrom, or Kyurem on their team. And the images of those Pokemon reminded me too much of what I saw. Those who have listened to my story have asked if they could take the game off my hands so they can see what happened for themselves. I refuse to let them. This hack game will be the curse to bear for all time. The images are just too horrible to share. Needless to say, I never bought a used game ever again. That's like one of the creepy things I am afraid will happen if you buy a used game, like a used game from anywhere from like GameStop. But like 99% of the time it's like not true. Although kind of morbid curiosity is like I would want to buy like a used game just for creepy shit like this to appear, because not only would it be like cool and creepy to experience, but like to also get that on camera and be like, hey, this shit was real. Like it's not just a story, like it actually fucking happened. It's like kind of like how there's that Easter egg of the ghost girl in X and Y when you go into one of the hotels and go to like the 7th floor or something, the screen flashes black and white and it makes like a weird alarm noise and the ghost girl pops up behind you and says, no, you're not the one, and just walks away. Like that. Like I would like to experience something like that, but I don't know. It's just an interesting like concept of like Oh, you buy a used game. Oh, fuck. It's so hacked to the point to where it's a nightmare. I don't know. I just think for myself, it would be kind of cool to witness and experience for myself because I don't know. I like creepy shit. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this one. If you're new to my channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button, give you a thumbs up, and hit the bell so you're notified when videos, which is every Wednesday. I love you guys, and I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.